Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Zerx What If, and welcome back to part 2 of What If Yuji was like all for one. Continuing where we left off, Yuji would have been back at his base of operations. As he would hear a knock on the door, Yuji would open the door and see a man with stitches on his forehead, just like his mother. The man would say hello and introduce himself. He would say that it was good to see Yuji again. Yuji would immediately realize who this was, putting a genuine smile on his face. He would be excited that Kinjaku had finally returned. It had been over a year, and Yuji was worried that Kinjaku probably would have gotten himself hurt, or even worse. Kinjaku would tell Yuji that he wanted him to meet a few people. Curses, precisely. Yuji would ask Kinjaku did he want him to absorb the curses, but Kinjaku would say no, and that they were needed for future plans. Kinjaku would step outside, inviting the curses into Yuji's home. This is where we see Jogo, Hanami, and Dagon enter, with Jogo asking Kinjaku who the brat was. Kinjaku would tell all of them that this was Sukuna's vessel, or more precisely, the boy who absorbed Sukuna's fingers. Jogo would be confused and ask Kinjaku what exactly does he mean. He would explain to Jogo that Yuji was originally supposed to be a vessel for Sukuna in order to house him. However, due to Yuji's innate technique, he essentially could become Sukuna if he wanted to. It didn't matter if he was the vessel or not, as long as Yuji was able to gather all 20 fingers and absorb them inside of his own soul, he could essentially become the next Sukuna. And in doing so, it would allow the golden age of Jujutsu to once return again. Yuji would ask Kinjaku why exactly would they need these curses to thwart their plans. Kinjaku would tell Yuji that he has a plan and he wants him to go back to Jujutsu High School. Yuji would tell Kinjaku that he can't exactly do that. He had taken the technique of one of the students and he's pretty sure he has an execution order on his head now. If he were to be seen by Gojo or any of the special grades there might be a problem. Kinjaku would tell Yuji that he doesn't need him to go in and pose as a student again. He just needs him to be a distraction along with some of the other curses. He would then ask Yuji what was the technique that he took from one of the students, with Yuji telling him that it was the 10 shadows technique. Kinjaku would be astonished. Yuji was able to capture a technique that valuable. He would tell Yuji, in the meantime, while they figure out how they're going to get inside Jujutsu High, Yuji would need to train the technique, as if it was his own. Yuji would say that he pretty much understands the premise of it. So for the next week, Yuji would do exactly that, training the 10 shadows technique, while Kinjaku and the other curses come up with a plan. In order to infiltrate Jujutsu High and steal more of Sukuna's fingers. He knows now that Jujutsu High will probably have a strong hold on Sukuna's fingers, seeing as Yuji is known to be the vessel for Sukuna. They probably send Gojo out every now and then to capture one of Sukuna's fingers to make sure he can secure it, so they would have to be extra careful in their planning. At the week's end, Kinjaku and all the curses would gather together, calling Yuji. They would begin to explain their plan to Yuji. Yuji and Hanami are meant to be sent into the Jujutsu High School to distract the both faculty and students, while Mahito and some other curse users will infiltrate Jujutsu High in order to take Sukuna's fingers. Yuji would say that was a pretty sound plan, and he didn't mind getting his hands dirty. There were numerous curse techniques at the school that he didn't get to see, so this would be a great opportunity for him to see more curse techniques and potentially take those as well. Kinjaku would smile and tell Yuji that within the next few days, they would infiltrate Jujutsu High, and for him to be ready. Yuji would tell Kinjaku that he couldn't wait. Over at Jujutsu High, Megumi would still be a Jujutsu sorcerer. Things would just be odd for him since he didn't have a technique. Gojo would have already offered Megumi to not be a sorcerer anymore, but Megumi said if he could still help people, he would. The death of his fellow classmate was simply unjust, and Yuji had to be stopped. Even if he couldn't use the 10 shadows anymore, he was going to do everything in his power that he could to stop Yuji. He would get stronger by any means necessary. He had begun training with Maki, using weapons, and special grade objects, so he wouldn't be left behind. As the Kyoto school sister event would be around the corner, Megumi would swear to himself that he'll get stronger no matter what happens. For Kugasaki and his sister, and for anybody else who's been cursed by Jujutsu, he would get stronger and make everything right. As the day of the Kyoto Sister School event would come about, Megumi would be pretty satisfied with the strength he had acquired for now, but it wouldn't stop him from getting even stronger. He was going to stop Yuji, and if he ever saw him again, he was going to kill him for killing Kugasaki and taking his technique, unaware that within the next hour, Yuji would be right in front of him. As the Kyoto Sister School event would begin, Maki would lead the charge, saying that she would take care of Toto for now, and for the rest of them to simply worry about taking care of the cursed spirits. She would hold off Toto for as long as she could, and if anything, Panda could switch out with her. and they would figure out the rest from there. Since there is no Sukuna's vessel inside of the school, the Kyoto team would simply do the same thing, go for cursed spirits, and let Toto do all of the work. Even though Megumi didn't have a technique, and they were greatly outnumbered, the Tokyo Jujutsu High team was still doing good. They were taking out some of the cursed spirits, but then suddenly, in the faculty room, all of the flares would begin to light up. They would all turn red, making it known that an unknown force has made its way into the arena. As the faculty would attempt to rush over, Gojo included, they would begin to see a barrier fall over the arena. They would all try to hurry up, but it would be too late. The barrier would have already closed. This is when Utsuhime and Gakuganji would realize that they were able to enter the barrier, with Gojo Satoru realizing that they had made a barrier to specifically keep Gojo himself out. Everybody else was allowed entrance except for him. He would tell them to go on ahead while he would figure out things from out here. This is when, on the inside, as Maki and Toto would be fighting each other, Yuji would jump in between both of them, stopping their fight abruptly. Maki would immediately realize who this was, seeing as she has heard of him from Megumi, the kid with gray hair and pale gray eyes, and with black dots on his hand. She would immediately tell Toto that this guy was Sukuna's vessel, and that he was the one that took Fushiguro's technique, and that they need to be careful. Yuji would smile and say that he didn't know he was so popular already. Toto would waste no time, however. Seeing that Toto was going to go in, Maki would yell and tell Toto to not let Yuji touch him, as she would be rushing in behind him. Yuji would smile, seeing as he wanted to test the 10 shadows on somebody, and he wasn't able to do so in his training week, so now would be the perfect time. He would use his anti-gravity technique plus his flames, shooting himself into the air, floating over both Toto and Maki. He would make hand signs for demon dogs, as they would begin to be summoned from his shadow. As the dogs would come out, they would be these grotesque looking demon dogs. He would mix the flame technique along with the 10 shadows, allowing the shadows to effectively have a cursed energy trait. He wanted to see how those two were able to deal with his demon dogs first, and if they were able to defeat those, it would only get worse from there. He would summon more and more until they couldn't do it anymore. He would send the demon dogs after Maki first, seeing as she had no cursed energy. However, to Yuji's surprise, with Maki using Playful Cloud, she would easily disperse of both of the Shikigami. Just then, Maki would begin to run at Toto. As she would begin to get close to him, she would swing Playful Cloud. Yuji would be confused as to why they would be attacking each other at this moment, but just then, Toto would clap, switching places with himself and Yuji, being directly in the range of Playful Cloud, as Maki would crack Yuji across the face, sending him flying through a tree. Yuji would be confused, but also excited. What was that technique? What made him switch places? What were the requirements for it? He wanted to know everything. Yuji would shoot up from off the ground, using his flames and anti-gravity technique. He would then make hand signs, summoning Rabbit Escape, combining his explosion technique with them. He would send them at Toto, as a large swarm of rabbits would then begin to sprint directly towards Toto. Yuji wanted to see how he was going to swap, and Toto knew that as well. He knew Yuji was watching his every move, so he wasn't going to play to his hand. He would simply run, not knowing what the rabbits were capable of. Toto would be sprinting through the trees, but just then, a rabbit would pop up from one of the trees he was attempting to turn on. But just before it could land on Toto, Toto would kick the rabbit. But unlucky for Toto, the second he would kick the rabbit, it would explode on impact. Yuji would let off a sinister smile, as a swarm of rabbits that were already chasing Toto would begin to catch up, about to pounce on him. Yuji would tell Toto that he has no choice but to use his technique, otherwise he's going to die. Maki would scream out to Toto, telling him that he needs to switch, as Toto would clap, switching himself with Yuji, as all the rabbits would jump on top of him, blowing him up. It had done a good amount of damage to Yuji, but since it was his own technique, it didn't hurt him that badly. Yuji would remark about how smart Toto was, and that he might need to take Toto out first. That technique is troublesome, and he wants it for himself. Maki wasn't much of a problem for him, since she wasn't really that strong. He could easily beat her after he disposed of Toto, so he would make his main focus Toto. Yuji would then use his anti-gravity technique plus his flames to fly over to Maki, but Toto was not allowing that to happen. But this is exactly what Yuji wanted. Maki would swing the Playful Cloud again, attempting to strike Yuji, but Yuji would duck underneath it. Yuji would then transform his hands into whips, using his anti-gravity technique to boost himself off of the ground, making it seem like he was going to attack Maki. But just as Toto would be about to clap, Yuji would change the trajectory of his attack, striking the ground. Toto would clap, but this time, nothing would happen. Yuji would be confused as he lands back on the ground, and the floor beneath him would explode. He would then tell Toto that it was good that he didn't show all of his hands in the beginning of their battle. Just then, Yuji would see an arrow traveling directly towards him from a while away. He would attempt to dodge the arrow, but Toto would clap once more, switching places with himself and the arrow, striking Yuji directly in the face. Yuji would laugh and say that that technique is so confusing. Yuji would then make hand signs, summoning Nue, combining his anti-gravity technique with Nue. He was going to send it after Maki again, hoping that Toto would switch out with her. And just as he had hoped, Toto would do exactly that, switching out with Maki, attempting to tank the hit from Nue. He would raise his guard and reinforce his body with cursed energy. But just as Nue would strike, Toto would begin floating in the air. Yuji would begin to smile, summoning Great Snake, which had been combined with Demon Dogs, since Maki had just killed them. So with the snake being even faster, it would zip straight over to Toto, and before Toto was able to get another clap off, the snake would crash directly into him, slamming him into a tree. Yuji would laugh and say finally. However, he would look around him and see the rest of the Jujutsu High students surrounding him. He would look at all of them and laugh. Then he would see Megumi and begin laughing even harder. He would mock Megumi for not having a curse technique anymore and ask him if he's really determined to get stronger in order to beat him, because he's gotten a little bigger since the last time they've met. Megumi would be equipped with a jet black blade. He would tell Yuji not to look down on him simply because he doesn't have a curse technique anymore. He was still strong in his own regard, and he was going to take revenge for Kugasaki. Yuji would stare at Megumi and ask who the hell is that. This would piss Megumi off. But before anybody can get another word off, Panda would come in his gorilla form, attempting to swipe at Yuji. Yuji would duck underneath the swipe, but just then, Inumaki would scream, "Don't move," as Yuji would be stuck in place. Noritoshi would then use his blood manipulation, attempting to use Crimson Binding to trap Yuji. However, just before the binding can trap Yuji, he would be freed from Inumaki's grasp, seeing that the blowback for Inumaki was a lot larger than he expected. He didn't realize that Yuji had an immense amount of cursed energy, and one word like that was enough to rip his throat to shreds. Just before the binding had reached Yuji, Yuji would make hand signs, summoning Rabbit Escape again, making sure to use his explosion technique along with it. As he would smack his hand onto the ground, the rabbits would begin to flood out of his shadow, going in every single direction. Yuji would let off a smile. He would make sure he sent it to everybody except for Megumi. As the rabbits would swarm, they would touch every last one of the other students. The rabbits would create a large explosion, as the faculty would see it from far away, but they were dealing with Hanami at the moment, so they couldn't interact with the students. Megumi would be the only one left sitting there that wasn't incapacitated. Yuji hadn't killed anybody. He just wanted to test out his 10 shadows. That was the only reason he was here. Megumi would look around as the smoke would clear. He would see all of his fellow classmates and his other Jujutsu sorcerers on the ground. He would feel helpless yet again. Yuji would walk over and laugh at Megumi, calling him weak. He would tell Megumi that he better be lucky that he hadn't killed anyone yet. He was feeling nice, and he was only going to take techniques today. There were a couple that he had seen, and he wants them. Megumi would grit his teeth and tell Yuji that he wasn't going to be taking anyone else's technique today. Yuji would grin and proceed to tell Megumi that by all means he could attempt to stop him, but it will be absolutely pointless. As Megumi would take one step forward, Yuji would stick his hand out and dart towards Megumi. Just before Yuji was able to touch Megumi, Yuji would hear a clap once again. Yuji would smile and turn around and say that he knew that he wasn't going to be down for long. Toto would have swapped Megumi's place with Playful Cloud. He had only been knocked out for a little bit, but it wasn't anything serious. Toto would apologize to Yuji for not taking him seriously, but now he would use everything that he has. Toto would ask Megumi if he was ready, with Megumi nodding to Toto, saying that he'll put full faith in him. Toto would clap his hands and tell Megumi to not stop moving. Megumi would nod, rushing straight in at Yuji. Megumi would go in for a right hook, and Toto would clap. Yuji would turn around, thinking that he was going to swap him with something else, but nothing happened. He would get punched in the right side of his ribcage, with Yuji turning around, attempting to swipe at Megumi, but Toto would clap again, swapping his place with Megumi, ducking underneath the punch, sending an uppercut of his own. This would take Yuji off guard, sending him up in the air, as Toto would scream, signaling Maki, as she would be seen jumping from one of the trees with Playful Cloud. She would swing down, cracking Yuji on the top of his head, smashing him into the ground, as Toto would clap again, using Maki's momentum to slam down on Yuji. Yuji would attempt to grab Toto, but Toto would clap again. Megumi would have thrown a rock, infused with cursed energy, straight towards Yuji. Toto would have used the momentum of the rock to strike Yuji once again, sending him back quite a bit. Yuji would begin to smile. He would begin to smile so hard that the sides of his mouth would begin to rip. He was so excited. These Jujutsu sorcerers were pushing him, and he couldn't be any more excited. Most people would be terrified that they're losing, that they weren't able to do anything. But instead of being afraid, something would have clicked inside of Yuji's head. He understood it now, as all three of them would begin to rush towards Yuji. Yuji would activate his anti-gravity technique, but instead of it activating as regular, he would activate the reverse. As Maki, Megumi, and Toto would slam into the ground, Yuji would begin to cackle. He finally understood it now. While getting beat, he was formulating numerous calculations in his head, trying to figure out what was the best possible thing to do in this moment. And of course it would be to figure out reverse curse technique. Even though he hadn't shown everything in his arsenal and probably could have easily wiped them all out, he was limiting himself for this exact reason. The greed that he has for himself to grow in mid-battle is the catalyst that allowed him to unlock reverse curse technique. He didn't understand it before, but now he finally got it. He would look at Toto and tell him that it was his lucky day. He just unlocked something amazing, and so many techniques just flooded into his head all at once. And since he wasn't able to register all those techniques at once, Toto's technique was safe for now. But he would look over at Megumi and tell him that he's feeling extremely nice. He wanted to test this with Kinjaku, but he'd rather just do it now. He would bend down, getting on Megumi's level, and tell him, "I'm not going to give you back your own technique, but I will give you a technique." He would then take the anti-gravity technique off Megumi alone, wrapping his hand around his throat, as his hand would begin to glow red. The flame technique that he took from the first cursed spirit, he would begin to transfer it inside of Megumi. He would tell Megumi that there were numerous things he could do with that technique. However, it was one of the weaker ones in his arsenal, and he planned on taking a stronger one later anyway. Yuji would throw Megumi to the side and say that he'd better be lucky he got something in return. Just then, the veil that was placed around Jujutsu High would then begin to break. Everybody would look up and see Gojo Satoru. Yuji would look back down at Megumi and tell him that he's extremely lucky today. Everybody gets to live, and you get another curse technique. Hanami would then appear before Yuji and tell them that they had to go. He would tell the curse not to nag him and that he knows. But just before he leaves, he would tell Megumi to continue getting stronger, because the next time they meet, he will kill him. Gojo would attempt to launch a purple. However, both Yuji and Hanami would get out before the attack even had the chance to reach their area. This would have been an overwhelming feat for the Jujutsu High School students, with the mission to steal Sukuna's fingers and other cursed objects going successfully. As Yuji and Hanami reached back to the hideout, they would meet up with Geto, Mahito, and Jogo. Kinjaku would notice that Yuji had gotten significantly stronger and ask him what exactly happened. Yuji would tell Kinjaku about how he unlocked reverse curse technique and about how he's able to apply the reverse to all of his techniques, even his innate one. Kinjaku would let off a devious smile. He knew it was possible. He would then tell Yuji that they have a lot more planning to do. Yuji would need to get even stronger because they would need his help in sealing Satoru Gojo. They were able to steal 10 fingers from Jujutsu High. Yuji could take those and consume the soul inside of them, making his shrine technique even stronger. Then over time, while they're planning on how they're going to seal Satoru Gojo, Kinjaku would tell Yuji of where other fingers will be, so he can consume those and get stronger as well. Mahito would be confused and ask Jogo and Kinjaku why don't they just actually find an actual vessel for Sukuna to be reawakened. They don't need some brat walking around as if he's Sukuna himself. They need the actual king of curses so the new world can actually begin. Someone like Yuji won't be able to make that happen. Yuji would question Mahito, asking him why exactly do they need the king of curses? Why is Sukuna so important? Yuji would tell Mahito that he would be able to make the new world happen. He doesn't need the king of curses or anyone with some crazy title to their name. All they need is him and Kinjaku's power. He would tell Mahito to sit and behave and stop being a nuisance. Mahito would get irritated with Yuji, calling him a nobody. Yuji would say the same to Mahito, calling him an unnamed curse who just happened to be born recently. He doesn't know why these curses believe themselves to be human anyway. They're just clumps of cursed energy that just happen to be able to think. Jogo, Hanami, and Mahito would flare up and get angry at Yuji for saying this. Jogo would tell Yuji that they were the true humans and that everyone else is just a fake. Yuji would laugh and tell Jogo if that was the case, why is it that humans like him are the ones that are in control of the world instead of clumps of cursed energy like him. Kinjaku would tell everybody to calm down and that fighting amongst each other wasn't the right thing to do. Yuji, Jogo, and Hanami would calm themselves down, but Mahito couldn't calm himself down. Someone like Yuji needed to be taken care of. They could do everything themselves. They didn't need a brat like him around. Mahito told himself that he was going to take care of Yuji and continue on with the plan without him. They don't need an arrogant brat like him going into the new world with them. Back over at Jujutsu High, Megumi would have woken up in a bed once again. He would have been confused. The last thing he remembers is Yuji telling him to get stronger and that the next time that they fought each other, he would die. All of a sudden, Megumi could feel a technique be engraved inside of his head, as if it was already there. He would use the curse technique and flames would begin to spew out of his hands. Yuji had really gave him a curse technique and wanted him to get stronger with it. It wasn't the 10 shadows, but it was still something. Gojo would walk into the room and ask Megumi if he was okay. Megumi would scratch his head and say this is deja vu. Gojo would laugh, seeing as Megumi was trying to brighten the room. Gojo would say, all jokes aside, was Megumi really alright? Megumi would say, yeah, he's even better than alright. He would tell Gojo to look at him. As Gojo would begin to scan him, he would realize that Megumi had a curse technique again, but it wasn't the 10 shadows. Gojo would kinda be amazed due to the fact that Yuji was able to come here and learn reverse curse technique on the brink of defeat, but also know that he failed again in trying to kill Yuji. It was a miracle that no one else had died or Yuji didn't take anyone else's technique. But they would need to set up extra precautions and call back Yuta because it was obvious that no one except for a special grade will be able to take on Yuji, and they needed Gojo at Jujutsu High just in case Yuji was to infiltrate again. They realized that Yuji and Hanami were simply a distraction so that the others that they were working with could steal more of the fingers for Yuji. Megumi would swear up and down that he would get stronger even with this weaker technique. Even if it wasn't the 10 shadows, he would make it his own and turn it into something stronger than it was. He would become greedy, exactly like Yuji was. Meanwhile, Yuji would have consumed all of the fingers that they had taken from the Jujutsu High School, making his shrine technique even stronger than it already was. He had absorbed a total of 13 fingers inside of him right now, and Kinjaku had just told him that there were 2 more fingers nearby that he could go and absorb. Mahito would have been plotting behind Kinjaku's back in order to try to kill Yuji. He was going to follow Yuji unknowingly and kill him whenever he got the chance. As Yuji would get to the location, he could sense the presence of Sukuna's fingers there. He would be walking through a forest, and there would be a large gathering of cursed energy underneath a bridge passageway. As he would take a step into the passway, the surrounding area around him would begin to change. Yuji would have realized that he would have entered the curse's innate domain. As Yuji would be looking around scanning the area for anything, a beam of blood would begin to fly directly towards Yuji's face. But just in the nick of time, he would dodge out of the way. Just then, he could feel it. It was something just like Sukuna's finger inside of the cursed spirit that was sitting right in front of him. If he was able to kill this curse, he would be able to take 2 of Sukuna's fingers as well as whatever was inside of this curse. It was another type of technique and he couldn't wait to grasp it. It would only add to his arsenal and make him even stronger. Yuji would sit back and smile. He was going to make this quick, and I think that's where I'm going to end this off here. I want to thank you guys again for all the support. I'm almost at 2K and it's only been less than 30 days for me. I really appreciate all of you. Like, actually, I'd see you guys making suggestions in the Discord. I see everything. I'm watching, I'm listening. I will create another poll soon. Not right now, but after I finish the what if Yuji was like Garo, I will be working on another what if. And I'm excited to be on this journey with you guys. So yeah, thank you for the support, and yeah, peace.